So, we're going to be talking about The Little Liar, and we're going to also get into a number of other topics. But I have to ask you first and foremost, you are such a prolific writer and you have tackled so many different projects over the year, this being the late over the years, this being the latest one. Where do you get your inspiration for what you write on?
Well, it probably stems back to when I wrote Tuesdays with Morrie. Up to that point in my life, I had been a very ambitious sports writer, and all of my writing had to do with touchdowns and home runs and things like that. So I never really considered a lot of other topics. And then when I sat with Morrie as he was dying from Lou Gehrig's disease, and every Tuesday we sort of did this last class in what's important in life once you know you're going to die, I realized that everything that I had been writing about never came up, like it was never important. And so after Tuesdays with Morrie came out, to be honest, I thought, well, I'll probably just return to sports writing. And then that book became something that nobody could ever have imagined. And while a lot of people always ask me about the success of that book, which is blessed and lovely, but for me, it was the life change of how people started perceiving me. Like instead of talking to me about who's going to win the Super Bowl, they wanted to talk to me about their mother who died from cancer. And the last thing they did was read Tuesdays with Morrie together. And so my world began to start to surround with much more significant things than just sports. And I was hearing about tragedy and grief and what's really important in life. And my atmosphere started to work around that. And every book that I've written since, and there have been, I think, 10 now since Tuesdays with Morrie, seems to have come from one of the inspirations of those Tuesdays that I spent with him. And you can kind of trace almost every book from The Five People You Meet in Heaven to For One More Day to there's like a line right back to one Tuesday that I spent with Morrie and sort of saw what really mattered at the end of life. And I try to let that guide me in my themes for my current books.
And that's amazing. And it really is incredible how one decision or one project or one thing in your life can set you on a totally different trajectory. And in the case of what you do, it's a trajectory that doesn't only impact you, but it impacts the millions of people who read your books, right? And who have experienced that. And one thing also about you that I have always found very, very just moving is that you and your wife, you're really active doing good in the world. I mean, you're down in Haiti where you're there every month. I mean, you've got an orphanage, you are helping children and really just helping alleviate suffering. Can you talk a little bit about that, because that experience to me, the fact that you do that, it's just so moving.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. I mean, again, that tie to Maury, there was a time when I said to him, I watched so many people going in to try to cheer him up, and he would end up turning the conversation, even though he was suffering from ALS and he was dying, but he turned the conversation, end up giving them a therapy session. And I would always say to him, why are you doing that? They're coming in because they feel sorry for you and to help you, and you kept turning around and trying to help them. And he says, Mitch, why would I want to take from people like that? Taking makes me feel like I'm dying. Giving makes me feel like I'm living. And
Wow.
that really kind of set me on my path about, all right, if that's what makes you feel happy at the end, when you really know you're going to die, is giving to people, then maybe that's the key to happiness now when you're young enough and healthy enough to do something about it. And I started my first charity that year, 1995, here in Detroit, where I live. And since then, there's a lot more that I've gotten involved with. I started an organization called Stay Detroit, and we have like 9 different operations. And then Haiti was kind of an outgrowth of that. I went after the earthquake in 2010. I didn't even know how to find Haiti on a map, but I went because I had heard an orphanage had been destroyed, and I couldn't imagine children buried under rubble. And I went to just try to help, and it turned out it hadn't been destroyed, but it had been overrun. I started helping it out. Next thing I know, the pastor who had been running it, said, I can't run it anymore. I'm 84. I don't have any money. And I sort of said, well, I guess I could run it, And he said, thank you. And that was it. We didn't see him anymore. And suddenly I had an orphanage on my hands. And so I made every mistake possible that you could make, being a guy who did not have kids of his own. My wife and I did not have children of our own at that point. But we now feel like we've got hundreds because so many kids have come through there, and we have 65 children there now. We have 12 who have graduated and come to college here in the States, and we have one who's in medical school, and all of them are doing amazingly well. And the blessing that I see every month for kids who have nothing. I mean, all of their possessions fit in a little 12-inch by 12-inch cubby. When I say possessions, it's mostly socks and clothes and tiny little, if there's a little toy, maybe one little thing. Some of our kids have been abandoned and left under trees to die, left out in the woods. Other kids have been left at malnutrition centers and nobody ever came back for them. We have kids with no birth certificates, no names. And yet you take these kids from the absolute worst circumstances and put them together in an atmosphere of love and faith, and they thrive. And our kids are trilingual. They're
Wow.
happy. They're joyous. They do devotions every night, and they thank God for what they have, and what they have is so little. So it's done a tremendous amount for me. You said what it does for other people, but it's done a tremendous amount for me in terms of a perspective on what's really tragic, what's really poverty, what's really struggling, and it tends to put my issues and many of our issues here in America in good perspective.
I mean, I can't imagine how difficult it is. I mean, how much goes into the mechanics of this, right? I mean, you mentioned all the things that you're doing for these children, all the things these children are doing, the day in and day out operations of this. When you said yes to that pastor and took this on for both you and your wife, this was a massive responsibility, and yet it seems to be really doing so much for you. As a person, showing you so much, teaching you so much, but how much of a time commitment is this for you? Just so people get an idea of your actual commitment to this, because it's intense.
Well, all I can say to answer that is anyone who has kids knows what the time commitment is. So multiply that by 65 and then 12 kids in college, and you'll get an idea. It's never ending, and it's perfectly fine, Billy. We took this on with an open heart, and the fact that it's never ending is just something you have to accept. And my wife is I'm blessed to have a most amazing wife, and she when I came home from Haiti and said, "Listen, how'd you feel about it if we ran an orphanage?" She didn't even budge. She said, "Okay, that's what God wants us to do. That's what we'll do." And between the two of us, I mean, sometimes we laugh because the day is mixed up between trying to find diesel fuel because there's a strike. We're trying to protect our kids from gangs, and on the other hand, you say somebody pooped, and you got to clean up a diaper because we have some of the kids living here with us, and so there's a balance of all of it, and you have to have a good sense of humor, but it's worth every difficult, crazy minute. It is the absolute joy of our lives.
And one of the other things that I know also changed your lives in an incredible way, in a powerful way, was Chica, your daughter who you adopted. And I know Chica passed away, but you just the it's an amazing story, and you wrote a book, Finding Chica, as well, about her and about that experience. But can you take us through that decision to adopt? I know this is such a loaded question, but I love hearing you talk about Chica and just the impact she had on your family.
Well, once again, I mean, you sort of don't have a choice. Chica was born 3 days before the earthquake. She survived the earthquake when the roof of the little hut that she was in fell backwards. The walls came down, but the roof went backwards, didn't land on her. And she was 3 days old. And that night she slept in a bed of sugarcane leaves out in the dirt. I always say, well, she was born tough, and she would need to be tough because her mother would die 2 years later, giving birth in that same rebuilt hut. There was no doctor present because there's never any doctors present when poor women give birth in Haiti. And something went wrong, and there was nobody there to deal with it. And she died in the same bed as her baby brother. Chica's baby brother was born, and Chica was brought to us then as an orphan. And for 3 years, she was the loudest, brashest, most obnoxious kid we had. Honestly, she was so loud. She would boss everybody around. She was like I always say, she was like Ethel Merman in size one shoes. You could hear her across the yard, but she was delightful in that her own way. She was mischievous, and she was loud. And Then one day when she was 5 years old, her face was drooping, and we examined it, and it turned out, long story short, she had a brain tumor called DIPG, which is a death sentence. And we were told that just take her back to Haiti. We brought her up here, and they diagnosed it. And they said, take her back to Haiti. She won't live more than another 4 months, and just let her be at peace.
Wow.
And we, my wife and I, looked at one another and said, not this child. I mean, you don't know. She's a fighter, and if she'll fight, we'll fight. And so you better start telling us like where there's the experimental treatments or things, because we're not going to give up. And she couldn't live 4 months or 8 months or 12 or 16 or 20, but she lived 2 years. And
Wow.
during those 2 years, she was an amazing gift to us. And while we weren't able to ultimately find a cure, which is what we were searching for, we found something else. We found a family. And as I mentioned before, my wife and I didn't have children of our own. And even though we had all these kids at the orphanage, suddenly here was a 5 year old here in Detroit sleeping at the foot of our bed and waking us up in the morning and asking for eggs and pancakes, and, and her being loud. And she gave us more joy in those 2 years than I could imagine getting in 20. And we traveled around the world with her trying to find a cure. And at one moment that stands out for me that I never forget, which symbolizes the whole thing, is that we were sitting at a table coloring upstairs here in this house, and I looked at my watch and I was late for this program that I do, and I jumped up. I said, "Chica, I gotta go." And she said, "No, Mr. Mitch, stay and color with me." I said, "Chica, I have to work." She said, "Mr. Mitch, I have to play." And I said, "Well, it's not the same thing, I have a job. This is my job." And at that point, I was carrying her everywhere because she couldn't walk anymore. And she crossed her arms and she looked at me and she said, "No, it's not. Your job is carrying me." And
Wow.
after I laughed at it, I realized, like, wow, truer words were never spoken. Of course, my job is to carry her. And there's a picture that I have of me with Chica, and just we're messing around, but she's smiling. But I have her in my arms, and I always look at that and I say, well, that's what life is. That is how you're defined, by what you carry. And for many years, I just carried my work, my accolades, my money, my paychecks, and then all of a sudden, you've got to drop all that, and you've got to take care of a 5 and 6 and 7 year old, and that's what's in your arms. But it's the best honor you can have, to carry a child and carry a sick child. And if you're blessed, like I've been blessed in my life, then to carry, the children of the world who have been ignored or abandoned or forgotten. And so she taught us all that. And I always say we didn't lose a child, we were given one. And that's how we try to look at it.
It's you answered so many of my questions there, because you wonder how, when something like that happens, you and your wife made this amazing decision to fight for Chica, and again, you're there helping her, but yet she's teaching you lessons along the way that have stuck with you. And I can't imagine, even the juxtaposition. Here we are, we're here doing an interview. We're talking about a lot of different things, but we're here to talk about your book and living in this amazing life that you have, where you are creating beautiful books for people to read, and you're dealing with media and all those things. And then on the other side of it, you're dealing with looking at just so much suffering, but providing resources for those in suffering and helping those. I mean, it's such an interesting dichotomy to me, and hearing you talk about it and how humble you are, it really is absolutely incredible. Before we talk about The Little Liar, if people wanted to find out more about the orphanage, how they could help you, and be involved in some way, where could they go to do that?
Very simple. The name of the orphanage is the Have Faith Haiti Mission Orphanage, and the website is havefaithhaiti.org. All one word, havefaithhaiti.org. And we take volunteers. We certainly take contributions. Every dollar that we get goes right to the kids. We don't use any of it for administrative things, whatever. I pay all that stuff out of my pocket. So if somebody gives us a dollar goes to help the kids. And they can find out all about it. There's videos all about it. And I want to answer your question there briefly, in that
Sure.
it's the dealing with the suffering and dealing with the kids who are challenged that enables you to do all those other things that you mentioned with the proper perspective. And that's why I don't get upset about a lot of that other stuff or whatever, because always in the back of my mind is, wait a minute, you think this is bad? No, being left on the floor of a malnutrition center for 2 years with nobody coming back for you, that's bad. And I know a child who's one of our kids who endured that, and or you think this is tough? No, trying to study with a flashlight on your lap with a pencil that keeps breaking through the paper because there's no electricity, and you're trying, that's how you have to go to school. And that kid is now in medical school here in the United States and a straight A student. That's tough, and so it's a great balancer of the rest of my day, as you point out, and I'm grateful for it every day.
Well, I love that, and I love that you shared that. Thank you for giving us that perspective too, because I think we can all complain about a million things in life, right? There's so much. It's easy to complain, right? It's a lot harder to put it in perspective, as you just so beautifully did. Now, your new book, The Little Liar. This book. First of all, what do you want us to know about this project? What is important to you about this book?
Well, a lot of people are probably going to say that I wrote it because of the events that are going on in the world right now in Israel and the Middle East. But it's not true because I started it 2 years ago and I had no idea that that
Wow.
was going to happen. I wanted to write, all of my books have some kind of theme and some kind of lesson that I can try to, that's important to me, that motivates me, that's passionate to me. And in this one, it was about truth and lying. And, we all tell lies in our lives, but some of them are more harmful than others. And some of them we spend the rest of our lives trying to make up for. And I wanted to write a book about truth, lying, and trying to be forgiven for the lies that we have told. And I ended up setting it during World War II and during the Nazi Holocaust in Greece, which most people don't even know Greece was invaded by the Nazis, but it was. In fact, the most Jewish populated city in all of Europe was Thessalonica, Greece, not any of the ones in France or Poland or whatever, but the largest majority percentage wise Jewish population was this city, Thessalonica, Greece, and the Nazis wiped it out. I mean, they literally virtually killed every Jew that was there. And I had heard a story about how the Nazis, in their cruelty, would sometimes get Jewish people to stand on the tracks of the train stations when the trains were going out to the concentration camps. And they would get these Jewish people to lie to the other Jewish people who were being hoarded in, saying, it's okay, they're taking us to jobs, they're taking us to new homes, it's going to be fine, everything's going to be fine. And so the people ended up literally going to their deaths. And I just thought that that was such a cruel perversion of the truth, which is what the Nazis did. And so I ended up creating a story about a little boy because I think it would be even worse. And it was an 11-year-old boy who'd never told a lie in his life. And his whole village, they all teased him because he never told a lie. They call him Snow because he's as pure as the snow and ever. And when the Nazis invade, they end up finding out about him and they kidnap him and they trick him into standing on the train platform and lying about where the trains are going. They say, if you do this, you'll just be helping people and then we'll let you go back to your family. And he does this until the last train, and he sees that they're putting his family on the train. And at that moment, someone yells out, they're not taking us to jobs, they're taking us to die. And he realizes that he's been lying all this time and he didn't know it. And from that moment where his family disappears and he's left behind, he can't speak the truth anymore. It won't come out of his mouth. Every time he speaks in a lie. And it follows him for the rest of his life and his brother and a girl and other people and how they interact with them and how that one lie that he was tricked into changed everything and what he does for the rest of his life to try to be forgiven for that act. And so that's what's behind it. Now, the fact that it has to do with Nazis and the Holocaust and Jews and all that, and all of a sudden I'm getting all these questions about, well, did you do this because of Israel? I said, no, I'm sorry, I'm not prescient. It was 2 years ago,
Right.
right? But I do think that there are lessons that are apropos of our time, particularly when it comes to truth, because I think we live in a time right now where people are sort of picking their own truths and just saying, well, that's the truth and I'm going to believe it. I'm not going to listen to anything else. And that's not what God means by the truth. There's one truth, and everything else is a variation or a lie about it. And so I think it's probably a pretty timely book.
Yeah, it is a little disturbing to have moments where you actually have the truth in front of you and you're presenting it to people or you're showing it and it's an undeniable truth and they will say that's not true. No, it's this way. And I think we've seen, as you're saying, more and more and more of that happening. And I am sure you're going to have a lot of questions. You're already getting them about that. But as you sort of look at where we are, and I'm not leading this in any way because I don't like to put people in those positions. This isn't a political question, but as we sort of look at where we are right now and what is happening, if people pick this book up, which I hope they will, and they read it, what do you think they could take away from it that might help them navigate or understand what is going on around us right now?
Well, there's an expression, unfortunately, it's a brilliant expression, but it was created by a Nazi officer. A lie told once is easily identified as a lie. A lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth. And I hope that people remember that and understand that there's a danger in repeating things that are false. And we're seeing that certainly in the Mideast, but we're seeing it in American culture too, starting to tell people things that, no, this is the way it is, and this is the way it is. And you go, no, but that doesn't make sense. Well, yes, it is, it is, it is, it is. And you get drumbeated 1,000 times. You go, okay, I guess it is. No, if it isn't the first time, it isn't the 1,000th time either, and we have to be careful about even the small deceptions that we say to one another. And I well, I've been talking to people who've read this book, and I say to them, "What's the biggest lie you ever told in your life?" And of course, a lot of times they don't want to share that with you. But I say, "Well, okay, you don't have to tell me, but what would you do to be able to take that back?" And how important would it be? And people sometimes start to tear up because you see how maybe it was a lie about infidelity. Maybe it was a lie that ruined their business. Maybe it was a lie that destroyed a friendship. And they try to put Humpty Dumpty back together, but it's hard to do. And the little boy in this book named Nico, he from the time he's 11, he's lying, but he's really lying to try to make up for the one lie that wasn't his fault. And there's a line in the book that's kind of, if it was a movie, it would be the tagline: "A man to be forgiven will do anything." And I hope that people kind of look at that whole question of forgiveness and forgiving ourselves for the lies that we tell, and find that in this book.
That is powerful. And having the ability, I would add, to when you realize you've told a lie or you've made that mistake, to be sorry for it and to openly say, you know what, maybe I was wrong about that, or I shouldn't have done that. And having a context to it. I think that we've lost the art of being able to do that, of being able to say, there's so much pride and humility that people just can't say, I had that wrong. That was wrong. And so I appreciate you working on this project, writing this project, and very excited for people to grab copies of The Little Liar. Thanks for your time today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to talk to you always. Thank you for having me on.